When Ellie's father unexpectedly leaves the entire family business to her manipulative sister, Amelia, she's blindsided by betrayal. As Amelia begins running the once-thriving cafe chain into the ground with greed and shady dealings, Ellie decides she won't stand by and watch her father's legacy be destroyed. Fueled by determination and anger, Ellie builds her own rival cafe, sparking a vicious war between the sisters. But as Ellie's business flourishes and Amelia's empire crumbles, a shocking revelation about their father's past threatens to ruin everything Ellie has worked for. Forced into a high-stakes battle of secrets, lies, and scandal, Ellie must make the ultimate decision: take Amelia down for good or risk losing everything she's built to protect her father's hidden mistakes. This is a gripping tale of betrayal, revenge, and justice that proves the hardest battles are fought closest to home. Losing Dad felt like losing the ground beneath my feet. For as long as I could remember, he had been the anchor that kept our family together, the driving force behind everything good in our lives. His laughter, his determination, his passion for the business he built from the ground up, it all seemed impossible to imagine a world without him. And yet, here I was, sitting in a dark leather chair in the lawyer's office, listening to his will being read aloud. Amelia sat across from me, composed as ever. She wore a crisp white blazer, her hair perfectly styled in soft waves. I couldn't help but notice the faint smirk playing on her lips. While I was still struggling to keep it together, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue, Amelia looked as if she were in a boardroom, ready to close a deal. That was her. Always polished, always confident. And always a step ahead. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading Dad's final wishes. At first, it all sounded routine. His personal possessions would be divided between us. Some money was set aside for charity. But then, he got to the part about the business. To my daughter, Amelia, the lawyer said, glancing at her over the rim of his glasses, I leave full ownership of the family business. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My head snapped up, and I looked at the lawyer, waiting for him to correct himself, to say there'd been a mistake. But he didn't. He kept reading. To my daughter, Ellie, I leave my personal savings account and my car. My mind reeled. His savings account? His car? I couldn't even process what I was hearing. The business, our business, was supposed to be split between us. Dad had always talked about how we'd run it together one day, combining Amelia's charisma with my knack for operations. That had been the plan for as long as I could remember. What the hell had changed? I turned to Amelia, but she didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked smug. Her lips curled into a faint, satisfied smile, as if she'd been expecting this all along. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just Dad's decision, this was her doing. She must have convinced him that she was better equipped to run the company, that I couldn't handle it. The betrayal was like a knife to the chest. After the will reading, I couldn't hold back any longer. I cornered her in the hallway, my voice low but seething. What did you do, Amelia? She raised an eyebrow, pretending to be confused. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about. Dad never would have left me out of the business unless you put that idea in his head. Her expression shifted, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the truth beneath it. Ellie, she said, her tone condescending, you've always been so emotional. Dad made his decision. Maybe he thought you couldn't handle the pressure. That's bullshit, and you know it, I snapped, my hands trembling at my sides. I've been running the back end for years. Without me, you wouldn't even know how to read a profit and loss statement. Her smile widened, and for a moment, I saw the cruelty behind it. Well, she said, her voice syrupy sweet, I guess we'll never have to find out, will we? I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything to make her understand how much she'd taken from me. But I knew Amelia well enough to know it wouldn't matter. She didn't care. All she cared about was winning. I left the office that day feeling shattered. For weeks, I couldn't think about anything else. Every memory of Dad felt tainted, overshadowed by the betrayal of his final decision. I started to doubt myself, wondering if maybe Amelia was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out to run the business. Maybe Dad had seen something in me that made him think I wasn't capable. But then I started to notice what she was doing to the company. At first, it was small things, cutting corners here and there to save money. But soon, it became clear she had no idea what she was doing. She replaced our local coffee bean supplier, a family-owned business Dad had worked with for over a decade, with a cheaper corporate chain. The quality of the coffee suffered immediately, and customers started to notice. She laid off employees who'd been with us since the beginning, replacing them with inexperienced staff who didn't understand the culture Dad had worked so hard to build. The final straw came when I heard about her plans to franchise the business. Dad had always been against it, saying it would dilute the brand and take away the personal touch that made our cafes special. But Amelia didn't care. All she saw were dollar signs. I couldn't stand by and watch her destroy everything Dad had built. I knew I had to do something. At first, I thought about going public with my grievances, airing out all the dirty laundry for everyone to see. But that wasn't enough. Amelia had taken the business from me, and I wanted it back. I didn't just want to stop her, I wanted to beat her at her own game. That's when I started doing my homework. I still had friends in the company, baristas, managers, even a few of the accountants. And they weren't happy. Amelia's cost-cutting measures had turned the once thriving business into a soulless machine, and morale was at an all-time low. They started feeding me information, little things at first, like how Amelia had cut their benefits or demanded unpaid overtime. But then came the bigger revelations. "She's skimming money off the top," one of the accountants told me over coffee one day. "Fake invoices, bogus expenses. She's been funneling company funds into her personal accounts." I stared at him, shocked but not surprised. Of course she was. Amelia had always been greedy, but this was criminal. I started digging deeper, piecing together a paper trail of her shady dealings. Every email, every suspicious transaction, every complaint from employees, I documented it all. The more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became. This wasn't just about me anymore. Amelia wasn't just ruining the company, she was ruining Dad's legacy. And I couldn't let her get away with it. But exposing her wasn't enough. I didn't just want her out of the picture, I wanted to prove that I could do what she couldn't. I wanted to build something better, something that would honor Dad's memory in a way she never could. That's when I had the idea for Bloom and Brew. It was a long shot, a crazy, half-baked dream that seemed impossible at first. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the right thing to do. If Amelia wanted to run the business into the ground, fine. I'd build my own. And I'd make sure it was better than anything she could ever hope to create. I'll never forget the day I signed the lease for my first cafe. It was a small, cozy space just a few blocks away from Amelia's flagship location. Some might have called it reckless, opening so close to her. To me, it was personal. If she wanted to run her business like a faceless corporation, fine. I'd remind people what a real cafe experience felt like, warm, personal, and full of heart. But Bloom and Brew wasn't just a cafe. It was my declaration of war. I poured every dollar of my inheritance into it, sparing no expense. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. Amelia had sacrificed quality for profits, but I wasn't making the same mistake. I scoured suppliers, looking for the best beans, the freshest ingredients, and the most sustainable partnerships. I spent hours testing different roast profiles, crafting a menu that felt unique yet approachable. I wanted everything about Bloom and Brew to feel special, like a reflection of what Dad had envisioned all along. The decor was another labor of love. Where Amelia's cafes had become cold and corporate, I designed Bloom and Brew to feel warm and inviting. I enlisted local artists to create custom murals for the walls, showcasing vibrant images of our city's history and culture. I even hung up a photo of Dad behind the counter, a subtle nod to his legacy. Every detail was carefully thought out, every inch of the space designed to make people feel at home. But my real coup was the staff. I still had friends in Amelia's company, disgruntled managers, talented baristas, and skilled team members who were tired of being mistreated. I started reaching out to them one by one, sharing my vision for Bloom and Brew. It didn't take much convincing. They were more than happy to jump ship, especially after hearing about the way I planned to run things. Respect. Fair wages. A say in how the cafe was managed. It was everything Amelia had stopped providing. Within weeks, I had a team in place, a dream team of seasoned professionals who were just as determined to make Bloom and Brew a success as I was. Together, we spent late nights painting walls, assembling furniture, and training for opening day. Every time I felt the weight of doubt creeping in, I reminded myself why I was doing this. This wasn't just about beating Amelia. This was about proving that I was more than the quiet, overlooked sister. I was capable. I was strong. And I wasn't going to let anyone stand in my way. Opening day came faster than I expected, and to my surprise, the place was packed. Word had spread about the new cafe, and people were curious. Customers lined up out the door, eager to try the coffee and pastries we'd spent weeks perfecting. The energy was electric, the buzz palpable. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. But it wasn't just about the numbers. As I moved through the cafe that day, greeting customers and checking on my staff, I saw something I hadn't seen in Amelia's cafes in years: joy. People were laughing, smiling, lingering over their cups of coffee. It wasn't just a transaction. It was an experience, the kind Dad had always dreamed of creating. For a moment, I let myself breathe. I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. But I knew better than to think Amelia would ignore me for long. The first shot came less than a week after we opened. One of my suppliers called, apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Ellie," he said, "but we can't keep supplying you. We've been offered a better deal with another company." I didn't have to ask who the other company was. Amelia had found out where I was sourcing my beans and swooped in, offering to pay more just to cut me off. It was a dirty move, but not unexpected. If there was one thing Amelia excelled at, it was playing dirty. But I wasn't about to back down. If she wanted to play this game, I'd play it better. I spent the next few days on the phone, reaching out to other suppliers, explaining my situation. Most of them sympathized, offering me deals that rivaled Amelia's. One even told me, "I've heard about what's happening over there. You're better off without them." Still, Amelia's interference rattled me. It was a reminder that no matter how well things seemed to be going, she wasn't going to make this easy for me. And she wasn't done yet. The next blow came a week later. A former employee of Amelia's, someone I hadn't been able to recruit, came into the cafe, looking sheepish. "I thought you should know," she said, glancing over her shoulder as if she were being watched. "Amelia's been telling people your place isn't safe. That the coffee isn't sanitary, that the health department should look into you." My blood boiled. She was trying to discredit me, to destroy my reputation before I even had the chance to build it. It was infuriating, but it only strengthened my resolve. If she thought I'd crumble under the pressure, she didn't know me at all. I doubled down, reaching out to local food bloggers and journalists, inviting them to visit Bloom and Brew and see for themselves what we were about. I worked harder than ever, pouring everything I had into the cafe, determined to show people the truth. And it worked. The reviews started pouring in, each one more glowing than the last. People raved about the quality of the coffee, the friendly atmosphere, the way Bloom and Brew felt like a breath of fresh air in a world of corporate chains. Business was booming, and for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. But Amelia wasn't going to let that stand. She escalated her attacks, slashing her prices, offering promotions that cut into her profits just to draw customers away from me. It was a war of attrition, and I knew it couldn't last forever. Eventually, one of us was going to break. But I had one advantage she didn't: the truth. I'd been sitting on the evidence of her corruption for months, quietly gathering more as her desperation grew. Emails, invoices, bank statements, everything I needed to prove that Amelia wasn't just a bad manager. She was a thief. And when the time was right, I was going to use it. For now, though, I focused on Bloom and Brew. On building something real, something lasting. Something Amelia could never take away from me. Because while she was busy tearing me down, I was building my empire. And I wasn't about to stop. Not until I had taken back everything she'd stolen from me, and more. Amelia's desperation was becoming more obvious with each passing week. I could see it in the increasingly aggressive tactics she was using to undermine Bloom and Brew. Her cafes had started slashing prices so low they were barely breaking even. She launched loyalty programs with ridiculous giveaways, free coffee for a month if you bought one drink. Her flagship location even started running events every weekend, live music, tastings, raffles. It was clear she was throwing everything she had at me, hoping to smother my little cafe before it could fully take root. But the harder she pushed, the more cracks began to show. I had friends who still worked in her company, and they told me what was happening behind the scenes. Her staff was overworked and underpaid. Morale had hit rock bottom. Employees were quitting left and right, frustrated by her micromanagement and impossible demands. The charm she'd once wielded so effectively was wearing thin, and her people were starting to see her for who she really was, a tyrant. Meanwhile, Bloom and Brew was thriving. Customers kept coming back, not just for the coffee but for the atmosphere we'd created. They loved knowing that their beans were sourced responsibly, that the pastries came from local bakers, that the art on the walls supported real artists in the community. Amelia could undercut my prices all she wanted, but she couldn't replicate the soul of my business. Still, I knew it was only a matter of time before she took things to the next level. And she didn't disappoint. One afternoon, as I was going over inventory in the back office, I got a call from one of my managers. "Ellie," she said, her voice shaking. "The health inspector's here." My heart sank. I'd heard enough stories from former employees to know how this worked. Amelia had connections, people she could pull strings with to make life difficult for her enemies. A surprise visit from the health department wasn't a coincidence. I rushed to the front, plastering a calm smile on my face as I greeted the inspector. He was a middle-aged man with a clipboard, his expression neutral but sharp. "Just a routine inspection," he said, though the way his eyes scanned the room told me he was looking for something specific. For the next 2 hours, he went through the cafe with a fine-tooth comb. Every corner, every piece of equipment, every log and record was scrutinized. My staff was on edge, but I stayed calm. I knew we had nothing to hide. We'd gone above and beyond to meet every regulation, and I made sure we kept meticulous records of everything. When the inspection was over, the inspector pulled me aside. "Everything looks good," he said, almost reluctantly. "There's nothing here to flag." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thank you," I said, trying not to sound too relieved. As he left, my manager turned to me, her face a mix of anger and disbelief. "This was Amelia, wasn't it?" "Of course it was," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But it didn't work. And it won't." That night, as I sat in my tiny apartment reviewing the day's sales numbers, I felt the weight of everything pressing down on me. The cafe was doing well, better than I could have hoped, but Amelia's relentless attacks were draining me. I'd built something good, something real, but I couldn't keep playing defense forever. If I wanted to win this war, I needed to go on the offensive. And I had the perfect weapon. For months, I'd been quietly building my case against her. Every shady transaction, every instance of fraud, every unethical decision she'd made, I had it all. Emails showing she'd skimmed money from the company. Fake invoices she'd used to justify bogus expenses. Payments made to shell accounts that traced directly back to her. It was a mountain of evidence, enough to ruin her career and possibly land her in jail. But I needed to be smart about how I used it. If I went public too soon, she'd find a way to spin it. Amelia was nothing if not a master manipulator. I needed to time my strike perfectly, to catch her off guard and ensure she couldn't recover. That opportunity came sooner than I expected. One morning, I got a call from one of my contacts at her company. "Ellie," he said, his voice low, "you're not going to believe this. Amelia's hosting a private investor event this weekend." "Investor event?" I repeated, confused. "Yeah. She's trying to sell a stake in the company. Word is, she's desperate for cash." It all made sense. Between the discounts, the giveaways, and the constant turnover of employees, her company had to be hemorrhaging money. She was probably hoping to bring in outside investors to keep the ship afloat. But what those investors didn't know was how deep her corruption ran. That's when the idea hit me. If I could get the evidence I'd gathered into the hands of those investors before they signed anything, it could destroy her. Not only would it expose her for the fraud she was, but it would also make her untouchable in the business world. No one would want to work with her after that. I spent the next few days preparing. I compiled everything into a single, damning document, a detailed report outlining her fraudulent activities, complete with screenshots, bank statements, and testimonies from former employees. I even included a timeline, showing exactly how she'd siphoned money from the company over the years. Then, I reached out to my contact. "Can you get me the guest list for the event?" I asked. He hesitated. "Ellie, if she finds out." "She won't," I assured him. "This has to stay anonymous. No one can know it came from me." The next day, I had the list. A mix of local investors, business leaders, and even a few journalists. Perfect. The night of the event, I dressed in my sharpest suit, printed out copies of the report, and slipped into the venue unnoticed. Amelia had rented out a fancy hotel ballroom, complete with chandeliers and a live jazz band. She was in her element, gliding from group to group with a glass of champagne in hand, charming everyone in sight. I stayed in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. When the speeches began, I moved quickly, placing a copy of the report on each table. By the time Amelia took the stage, the room was already buzzing with whispers. People were flipping through the pages, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock to disgust. Amelia noticed. She faltered mid-sentence, her confident facade cracking as she realized something was wrong. "If you'll excuse me for a moment," she said, hurrying off stage. I didn't stay to see what happened next. I didn't need to. I knew the damage was done. The next morning, the fallout began. Investors pulled out of negotiations. Journalists started calling, asking for statements about the allegations. Employees began quitting en masse, unwilling to be associated with the scandal. Within days, Amelia's empire was in freefall. And I wasn't finished yet. The fallout from the investor event was bigger than I'd imagined. Amelia's once pristine reputation crumbled overnight. Articles splashed across local news sites exposed her fraudulent practices, complete with damning evidence from the report I had quietly distributed. Customers began boycotting her cafes, employees staged public walkouts, and Amelia's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments from people who had supported our family business for years. But what really sealed her fate was when one of her closest allies, her longtime CFO, flipped on her. He claimed he'd warned her about the legal and ethical risks of her actions, but that she'd pressured him to comply. To save himself, he handed over even more evidence to the authorities, corroborating everything in my report and adding details I hadn't uncovered. Within weeks, Amelia was under investigation for tax evasion, embezzlement, and fraud. For a while, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. Amelia's empire was in ruins, and Bloom and Brew was thriving. My little cafe had become a symbol of resilience, a place where customers came not just for coffee but for the story behind it. I had succeeded in honoring Dad's legacy in a way that felt true and right. But just when I thought it was over, something happened that I didn't see coming. It started with a phone call. I was in the middle of reviewing plans to open a second Bloom and Brew location when my phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar, but I picked up anyway. "Ellie Foster?" a smooth voice asked. "Yes, who's this?" "My name is Richard Hale. I'm an attorney representing Amelia Foster. She'd like to meet with you." I nearly laughed out loud. "Amelia wants to meet me? After everything she's done?" "Yes," Richard said calmly. "She has something important to discuss. She insists it's in your best interest to hear her out." I wanted to tell him to shove it. I wanted to slam the phone down and forget the call ever happened. But something about his tone, cool, confident, made me pause. Amelia had lost everything. What could she possibly want now? Against my better judgment, I agreed. The meeting was set for the next evening at a small, out-of-the-way cafe. Not one of hers, obviously. She wouldn't dare show her face in public at one of her locations. When I arrived, Amelia was already there, sitting in the far corner. She looked nothing like the polished, confident sister I'd grown up with. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her once expensive blazer hung loosely on her frame, and there were dark circles under her eyes. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You've got 10 minutes, I said as I sat down across from her. She smirked faintly, the ghost of her old self peeking through. "Always straight to the point, aren't you, Ellie?" "Cut the crap, Amelia. Why am I here?" She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. "You've been busy," she said, her tone laced with bitterness. "I underestimated you. I'll admit that." I didn't respond. I wasn't here for her fake apologies or grudging compliments. She sighed and leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Look, I know you think you've won. But there's something you don't know, something Dad never told you." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She glanced around, as if making sure no one was listening, then dropped the bombshell. "Dad didn't leave me the business because he thought I deserved it. He left it to me because he didn't trust you." I blinked, stunned. "That's ridiculous. He trusted me more than anyone when it came to the business." "Did he?" she said, raising an eyebrow. "Did he ever tell you about the loan?" "What loan?" Her smirk returned, sharper this time. "The loan he took out to expand the business 5 years ago. The one he used your name to co-sign." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? That's not possible." "Oh, it's very possible," she said, pulling a folder from her bag and sliding it across the table. "Dad was in a tight spot. He needed cash fast to open the new locations, but his credit was maxed out. So, he used your name to secure the loan. And when he died, that debt became yours." I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were documents, bank statements, loan agreements, and payment schedules. My name was right there, listed as a co-signer on a 6-figure loan. A loan I had never agreed to. A loan I had no idea existed. "This can't be real," I whispered, my heart pounding. "Oh, it's real," Amelia said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "And guess what? Since you didn't know about it, the payments haven't been made in months. The bank's getting ready to come after you, Ellie. Hard." I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want?" She leaned forward, her expression turning serious. "I want a deal. You dropped the crusade against me, and I help you clean this up. I've still got connections, people who can make this go away. But if you keep pushing me, I'll let the bank come for you. Let's see how long Bloom and Brew survives when your accounts are frozen and your credit is trashed." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even after everything, Amelia still found a way to trap me, to pull the rug out from under me. I wanted to scream, to throw the folder in her face and walk away. But the weight of the documents in my hands reminded me that this wasn't just about pride. This was about survival. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "You're bluffing," I said, my voice firm despite the fear clawing at my chest. She shrugged. "Try me." For the next few days, I dove into the documents, consulting with lawyers and financial experts to verify her claims. To my horror, they were legitimate. Dad had co-signed the loan in my name without telling me, and now I was legally responsible for it. If I didn't act fast, everything I'd built, everything I'd worked so hard for, could come crashing down. But I wasn't about to let Amelia win. Not this time. Instead of caving to her demands, I went back to my contacts, the same ones who had helped me take her down in the first place. Together, we dug deeper into her finances, looking for any leverage I could use. And then, we found it, another hidden account, this one tied to offshore holdings she'd been quietly siphoning money into for years. Armed with this new evidence, I went to the authorities. Amelia thought she could blackmail me, but her desperation had made her sloppy. The offshore accounts were the final nail in her coffin. Within weeks, she was hit with additional charges, and her assets were frozen, including the money she'd planned to use to help me. As for the loan, it wasn't easy, but with Bloom and Brew thriving, I was able to renegotiate the terms with the bank, spreading the payments out over time. It would take years to pay off, but I was determined to do it. On my own terms. Amelia, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. The last time I saw her, she was being escorted out of her mansion by federal agents, her designer heels clicking against the pavement as she was loaded into the back of a black SUV. In the end, she didn't just lose the business or her reputation. She lost everything. And me? I finally had peace. Not just because I'd won, but because I'd proven to myself, and to her, that no matter how many times she tried to tear me down, I would always rise. Some people call it karma. I call it justice.